plants and the content.
The 18 climbers returned to a homecoming reception on the 7th of June. Their leader was Scots mountaineer Malda.
It was very helpful in the sun.
Mal's wife, Liz, who was not such a dedicated climber, had come along to add moral support.
What beat you this time?
Well, we had continuous bad weather from about the 28th of April onwards. And we were climbing throughout that, which made us very, very fatigued generally. But we had no option, we had to keep going at that point. And then there was a final storm, at which point I decided it was too dangerous for the guys from the hill and it'd be better getting off that time.
The approach is up here, past the monastery, the Rongbuk Monastery.
Rick Allen. His role had been crucial in the outcome of the expedition.
And then we had this 12-mile approach wall.
Tony Brindle, one of the youngest climbers.
Everything that we need to do the pinnacles is actually at the foot of the pinnacles. So we effectively did all the hard work and then didn't get the reward, really. But having said that, none of us at all have been injured. You know, we've all got 10 digits. We're all still speaking to each other. You know, we've been a cohesive unit the whole time. And, you know, that's success to me.
When the rest of the expedition returned home to their families, Kurt and I were still battling with the mountain. We had to stay on to rescue our valuable film equipment, marooned by the final storms on the North Col, and we wanted to make one last attempt to film as high as possible on the mountain. It now seemed almost no time at all since the beginning of the expedition, when we'd all arrived in Tibet's capital, the forbidden city of Lhasa, on the 10th of March. The city is dominated by the Potala, once home of the Tibetan God King, the Dalai Lama. For centuries, the highest building on earth. After 35 years of Chinese rule, Tibet has seen many changes. On the one hand, its economy has improved, but it's also seen the destruction of thousands of its ancient forts and temples, the core of its civilization. But the regime which unleashed this devastation couldn't crush the Tibetans' belief in the Buddhist faith. And here in the Okan temple, the intensity of religious fervor is extraordinary to see. The flagstones are polished to mirror smoothness, hollowed out by pilgrims who've worshipped here on and off for over 1,000 years. In 1960, the Chinese turned this Holy of Holies into a cinema. It would be like turning St. Paul's into a bingo hall.
The pilgrims file past the solid gold prayer wheels. Each spin, they believe, will bring them merit in the afterlife. And old men, some monks or even learned lamas, homeless since the destruction of the monasteries, come here to bless and pray. Many have traveled hundreds of miles. In the old days, they used gloves made of wood or leather to protect their hands. Now, some use discarded tires.
Everywhere there's the sound of construction. It's like a huge building site. New roads, new hotels, now being built in the traditional style. After being closed for so long, the Chinese have now opened Tibet to Western tourists. They planned for 2,000 this year, 100,000 by 1990. But will the dollar succeed where the Cultural Revolution failed and destroy their traditional beliefs and way of life?
We are mountaineers, but Lhasa's altitude made climbing the hundreds of steps up to the Potala a long, searing endurance test. We were only at 13,000 feet. What would Everest be like?
Well, I'm told the Patola has got 1,000 rooms. I hope it hasn't got 1,000 steps to get to it.
I agree with that. Is this part of the high altitude training, Mel?
Well, feels like it, doesn't it?
The Potala was begun 300 years ago by the 5th Dalai Lama. There was a terrible panic when he died suddenly, and fearing the work would never be finished, the news of his death was kept a secret for 10 years until the Potala was completed.
Beautiful colours.
Yeah, maybe natural dyes.
It's always the same colours.
I think it's probably because the sky's so blue it stands out against it.
The climate here, too. The colours will last for years compared with it back home.
It was so imposing from the outside, but inside just a museum. It was now empty of the life for which it had been built. 13 stories connected by rickety wooden ladders, corridors lit by dim electric light bulbs. It had survived the Red Guards, but may not survive the wiring that would burn like a torch. We were now 1,000 feet above the town, and exploring the rooftop courtyard, we discovered a beautiful golden creature.
Fantastic teeth. Well, there's something inside, John.
And then I can take it out the other end.
Well, it's hard.
Great stuff.
Look at his beard.
And that slop there, it's all good luck for you, John.
Oh, I need all I can get.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, there's some. Right, let me come back with 10 things and 10 toes.
While we were in Lhasa, Kurt and I celebrated our joint 99th birthday. I'll leave you to guess how it's made up. The others celebrated with 99 cans of Chinese beer. We were born 7 years, but just 1 day apart. But Kurt's the oldest, and lighting all those candles was quite a hard job.
Let it burn until it is fresh. 99 years. Blowing them out was even harder, but our good mountaineering lungs helped. Big blow, eh? Yeah.
The morning after the night before. We'd set off from Lhasa in the early morning. Wrapped up like mummies against the bitter cold, we lurched and bounced across the vast Tibetan plateau. The 3 lorries carrying our 7.5 tons of equipment and supplies threw up clouds of choking dust to add to our discomfort.
On the second uncomfortable day, as we climbed over a high mountain pass, we saw a magnificent turquoise lake, Yamdok-Chamdo, stretching away for miles down the valley.
It's become a haven for hundreds of migrating birds, and in the autumn its shores are carpeted with masses of wild flowers, which the monks collect to prepare their herbal medicines.
The dust and dirt of the plains and the aches in our cramped muscles made us long for a soothing bath.
We stopped at some hot springs, which were also used as the local bath club.
I would never believe it.
The water was almost too hot to get into.
The sight of view for the locals.
That's the story of the day.
We knew this would be our last bath for at least the next 3.5 months. We savoured every moment. Throughout our journey, we passed many shrines and temples, but most lay in ruins, destroyed by the Chinese.
In old Tibet, almost every family had at least one son in a monastery. During the Cultural Revolution, most of the 100,000 monks became homeless. Now, for the first time in over a quarter of a century, the monasteries are again being allowed to take on novices, some no more than 5 years old.
The Tashilhunpo monastery here in Shigatse contains the monastic college. It's also the seat of the Panchen Lama, Tibet's highest incarnation in the absence of the Dalai Lama, who fled Tibet in 1959 and is still living in exile in India. But the trends towards increased religious freedom have encouraged the hope that he may one day return to resume the spiritual and secular leadership of Tibet.
The monks are served with tea made from salt and rancid butter,
which no English tea drinker would appreciate. It tastes like sour chicken soup. They drink up to 60 cups a day to ease their straining throats. The air's heavy with the smell of incense and molten rancid butter from the thousands of lamps. Over 1/3 of the country's butter production goes to fuel the lights of its remaining monasteries.
Our convoy moved on relentlessly. We had now left the Friendship Highway, the road built by the Chinese to connect their country with Nepal and opened this year officially as a tourist route. Although our journey of a few days seemed long and arduous, it had previously taken many months to cover the hundreds of miles across this immense plateau to the mountain.
It was now the afternoon of the third day, and as we crested this 5,000-meter pass, we got the first real glimpse of our goal. We gazed out over an enormous wall of snow-capped peaks, and towering above them all, Chomolungma, goddess mother of the world. But our feelings of elation were soon mixed with terrible doubt. What did the mountain hold in store for us? 1 in 10 mountaineers never return, and the only other attempt on the northeast ridge had claimed the lives of 2 of Britain's best high-altitude climbers, Pete Boardman and Joe Tasker. Were we really prepared to tackle such an enormous undertaking?
On the 21st of March, 15 days after leaving England, we arrived on a desolate plateau of sand and stones. We were at the height of 17,000 feet, just below the Rongbuk Glacier, and this was to be the nearest thing to home comfort for the next few months. The sun was shining, but gave no heat, and the temperature was just above freezing.
At base camp, we all had our little personal tents to sleep in. Some degree of privacy was important. There was also a large mess tent for communal living. We would all return to this camp to recover after each push up the mountain. There were plenty of jobs to keep us busy while we acclimatized. Bob, the expedition photographer, became a stove mechanic. Urs, our Swiss doctor, sealed up cracks in Danny's fingers caused by the cold with a special sort of glue. Tony was dealing with his own case of frostbite.
My trousers are out for 3 minutes. They're like cardboard. It's ridiculous.
One of the biggest jobs was sorting out the 4 tons of food. 5,000 tea bags, 250 litres of soup, 40 pounds of cheese, 6,000 chocolate bars.
And 1,200 sticks of Everest rock.
With Northeast Ridge written all the way through. Rations for high on the mountain needed to be as light as possible, and something like a factory production line was set up to pack the vast amounts of dehydrated foods.
These high-altitude ration packs that we've got to do, we must have done about 300 or so.
Oh, we must be nearly there now.
But it's water that creates the real problem. Each barrel had to be laboriously dug out from beneath the surface of the frozen river and dragged back over its uneven surface.
A pint of water weighs 1.25 pounds, and this is a 25-gallon drum.
It was now the 28th of March. The mountain was still 12 miles away, and we were anxious to get moving. Malduff discussed the route with David Bricknell, our camp organizer.
The vital thing to remember is we've got to get the entrance into the East Robot Glacier. Now, that was the thing that in 1921 they missed and had to walk about 500 miles around the mountain. We're at base camp here, and we have to move up the side of the glacier there. And this is the turn-off into the East Robot Glacier, just in this narrow junction between the two hills. And then from there we go up this side of the glacier to our advanced base camp, which will be there.
The Rongbuk Glacier was a spectacular world of glistening ice towers.
These ice pinnacles proved too much of a temptation, although they were like dwarfs in comparison to Everest. Urs, the expedition doctor, and Andy decided to put in a little practice.
Although these were only about 30 foot high, the lead climbers would use the same techniques on the mountain, working in teams of 2 while fixing the ropes. Some of the climbing partnerships resulted from previous friendships. Others evolved during the expedition, as with Andy and Urs.
Surely the best thing what I have had in my life.
Oh, the ones on the other side were brilliant as well.
Yeah?
Hold an elephant on them.
Okay.
There has to be a trust and compatibility, a respect for each other's strengths, awareness of the weaknesses. When you're linked by a rope, you're dependent on each other, responsible for each other's safety. In the far more serious conditions on the northeast ridge, tiredness, altitude, the constant wind and extreme cold would test all these qualities to the limit. The 12-mile journey up the glacier to advanced base camp was made easier by a team of 40 yaks, which carried the heavier loads. They have the opposite problem to us with altitude, unable to live below 10,000 feet, but still quite nimble at 20,000. They're unpredictable animals, a cross between a placid cow and a ferocious bull. After this one shed its load, it ran away. The yak drivers had to carry the drums, each weighing about 70 pounds, for the rest of the journey. In a country where yaks represent the family wealth, such a loss was a tremendous blow.
At last we had arrived at the site of the advanced base camp. It was now the 30th of March, a bleak and inhospitable place to set up even a temporary home. Just ice, snow and rocks.
It took 2 yak journeys to get all our gear up to advanced base. Food for 2 months, oxygen, climbing equipment, including 6,000 foot of fixed rope, and skis or snow riders as the Tibetans called them. We were now 6 times as high as Ben Nevis, and with only half as much oxygen in the air here as at sea level, even the slightest effort was exhausting. Temperatures would be as low as -27 at night and -16 in the middle of the day. Each morning, everything from sardines to sun cream would be frozen solid.
There you go.
Oh, cheers, thanks very much. 6,000 metres, eh?
All right, who's up, eh?
Oh, you got some chat.
We were all pleased to be in the shadow of the mountain, but life here would be very tough. Again, there was no running water, and it took all afternoon just to make tea and soup for everyone.
We paid off the drivers and said our goodbyes. They moved off slowly down the valley. We would not see them again for the next 2.5 months.
For the first time, the expedition was left entirely alone. So here it was at last, the northeast ridge. It looked endless, and we knew that the higher we got, the harder it would become. And high on the mountain shoulder, the place where Pete and Joe were last seen. The pinnacles, sticking out like shark's teeth, blocking the way to the summit with its pennant of cloud, which still seemed so distant. It was now the beginning of April. The mountaineers, now acclimatized, were setting off to take their first steps on the ridge. But before reaching the foot of the mountain, you have to cross a vast expanse of crevassed ice, often covered in quite deep snow, the Rafula.
Once you get to the ridge, the summit is still 4 miles away, and day after day we would make the exhausting climb up and down the mountain until we reached a point high enough to make an attack on the summit, which, if the weather was good, we hoped to do at the end of May. It was now almost a month since we left England on the 6th of March, and we were at last on the mountain.
Tony Brindle and Rick Allen led the way. It was exciting for them to be pushing out the route, but they must have been aware of the great responsibility they had to choose the safest way for the others to follow. As they weren't fully acclimatized, they could only spend 1 day on the mountain.
The weather was excellent, and the snow was in really firm condition, so we were able to make quite good progress. And we got up to about 6,700 meters. And we left 1 coil of fixed rope at our high point. So we were pretty pleased with the day out.
It's really good to be climbing again after all the big expedition like this takes so long to actually get to advanced base like this. So it's very nice to be on the hill and actually doing what we came to do.
Any expedition will benefit from the amount of information you can discover about the mountain. So while our climbers continued to lay siege to the ridge, Kurt and I set off on an exploration, following in the footsteps of Mallory and the British pioneers, who first came to Everest in 1921. Looking down the east side of the mountain from the ridge, we were confronted by the Kanchung face, with its fantastic ice formations. Sheer flutings of snow clinging to steep black rock, and a terrifying drop of 11,000 feet into the deep bowl of the Karma Valley below. This is where our exploration was to begin, and like Mallory over 60 years before, we made our camp at Petang Ringmo, under the gigantic ice cliffs of Chomolonzo. The humidity has created lush forests with rhododendrons and meadows of wild flowers, a total contrast to the arid mountain desert on the north side. Further up the valley, we were told we may see monkeys and bears, perhaps even the Yeti.
The deep cover made the going pretty difficult, but the spectacular scenery was more than compensation.
As we made our way up the moraine of the Makalu Glacier, we saw why the early explorers had called this one of the most awesome and beautiful valleys in the world.
Everest, Lhasa, Lhasa, Chomolonzo, Makalu, an incredible panorama of some of the highest mountains in the world.
Like Mallory, we came into the valley over the Shoala, where we met up with a group of Tibetan women who were crossing the pass to get into the next valley. Copying the Tibetans, I touched the prayer flags, which traditionally marked the head of the pass.
The women invited us to join their picnic. They were drinking chang, the local beer made from millet. It went straight to their heads and they were soon quite tipsy.
Although the chang didn't have a high alcohol content, it lifted our spirits too and helped us over the next few miles.
From the Kama Valley, looking back up to the Kangchung face, it was easy to see why Mallory had decided not to try the mountain from this side. He went instead to explore the possibilities of the north face of Everest. We followed his footsteps, approaching the mountain from the northwest, going towards the low La.
Exploration is always a fascinating part of an expedition. No less an adventure than reaching a summit. We were in a fantasy world of giant sugarloaves, witches and wizards, like walking through the pages of a fairy tale. And above this ever-changing world of ice, Everest. We were soon back on the northeast ridge, climbing up to the snow cave at Camp 2 at about 23,000 feet. As I climbed, I thought about Bonnington's expedition. For in all this icy waste, Mal Duff and Chris Watts had stumbled across one of their snow caves, complete with pots and pans, and even food. The climb up was not technically difficult, but that meant I didn't have any distraction from the tedious, repetitive movements. It took every ounce of my energy and willpower. It's a Herculean task digging out these snow caves, but unlike tents, they allow you to escape from the constant noise of the 100-mile-per-hour winds, and they can't blow away in the night. On the mountain, we ate dehydrated stews and soups, all cooked and eaten out of one pot. The caves are very drafty, and we had to act as hot water bottles to our boots, so that they didn't freeze and cause frostbite.
All the time your clothes are damp, and as you cook, water drips everywhere.
The altitude causes dehydration, so you're supposed to drink at least 12 pints a day. But the snow scraped from the walls contains no minerals, so the body just deteriorates.
The cramped, oppressive atmosphere of the cave crushes your spirit. It's a relief to get out.
And down at Advanced Base Camp, John Tinker was complaining about the tents at Camp 3.
That's what I mean.
Tents, my God.
Freeze up?
They're too low, yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's why I
They're
think
really,
it's so
really
nice.
small as well.
Yeah.
Let me really quite small. You know, it really crept up.
Yeah. Yesterday morning, did either of you two go down the ridge a little bit? I saw a third climber, absolutely clear as day. Three of us individually saw somebody walking along that ridge towards your camp, about two-thirds of the way along. It wasn't Sandy and it wasn't you two.
No.
So it's the mystery third climber that Chris and I felt jugging up the ropes a couple of weeks back. It really is, because it was clear as day.
Ghostly experiences have been reported several times from the Himalayas. Bennington's expedition too had seen such a phantom figure.
While John knew nothing about the mysterious figure up on the ridge, he knew quite a lot about this one. It's not often you see a floppy-eared pink rabbit on the slopes of Everest, and we adopted it as our expedition mascot.
We shared the north side of the mountain with a team of 4 Basques from Pamplona in Spain. Down at their base camp, they had the luxury of water for drinking and washing, and masses of tiny alpine flowers.
When you're up on the mountain, you can't wash for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. It's too cold to take your clothes off. You keep them on day and night, just wiping your face and hands. It's so good to wash your hair, put on clean, dry clothes, and relax away from the pressures of the climb. Everyone looks forward eagerly to letters from home. Anton showed me some he'd received from a group of school children. These 4 young men had become heroes in Pamplona, their hometown. Their attempt to climb the highest mountain in the world had really captured the children's imagination. The Basques have a long mountaineering tradition, admired for their courage and determination, qualities they would need more than ever in the weeks to come. We accompanied them as far as our advanced base camp, where we said our goodbyes. Despite the terrible risks, Everest is booked by expeditions until 1995. The Basques were continuing on up the glacier to make a summit bid by the adjacent North Col route, which joined the northeast ridge just beyond the pinnacles. As they set off, they were laughing and joking, but only too soon the happy atmosphere would be replaced by great sorrow. For Juanjo, the last of the mountaineers to leave, was never to return.
We also set off for the North Col, loaded down with film equipment, about 55 pounds each.
The early part of the route is extremely steep and dangerous, with the constant risk of falling ice blocks and hidden crevasses. It was a relief to discover a ladder left by an earlier expedition to help us up a difficult section of the vertical wall. I felt part of the mountain's history, aware of the other mountaineers who'd struggled up these sheer snow cliffs, like Mallory and Irving, who'd disappeared high on this route in 1924. A fierce wind whipped up splinters of ice, driving them into our faces like scouring powder. And as we approached the col, the peaks of Nepal spread out below. Above was the summit of Everest.
The Basques had been on the mountain for 3 days, and there had been terrible storms. Like us, they would have been confined to their tents. The effects of the altitude and the constant noise of the ferocious wind leaving them exhausted. We waited anxiously for them to return, and were very relieved when at last they appeared.
Then suddenly it happened. 2 of the Basques began to fall, on and on down the mountain.
We looked on horrified, unable to do anything.
Finally they stopped on some rocks. One of them was dead. The retreat for the remaining 3 was agonizing. Kurt went up to help them down. Anton, the other climber who had fallen, was incredibly lucky. He only had a broken wrist.
Anton was completely dazed, in a state of total shock. We wrapped him in one of the aluminium-coated tents to attempt to keep him warm whilst we packed up. It was now essential for us to help them off the mountain as quickly and safely as possible.
Down at base camp, Urs treated Anton's broken wrist. Later, Anton told me that despite the death of his friend, he was determined to return and attempt to climb Everest again.
The terrible storms which had exhausted the Basques and led to their tragedy affected our climbers as well.
It's just me and Rick up here. We arrived in snow and it's still snowing, so let's hope things get better for tomorrow, over.
Well, it's snowing pretty heavily here as well. Has been almost all the day. Sandy's staying in the first snow cave. I think he's planning to bring up oxygen tomorrow. Perhaps even go in support of you if the weather's better. Over?
Okay, thank you. Could you have a quick look in the book and tell us where the tent is, please? Because we're hoping it hasn't blown away, over.
We had to keep a log of what was stored in each camp. It was easy to lose track. Time was rushing away, and there was still a great deal to do if we were to make an attack on the summit before we had to leave.
Long stays at altitude were wearing people out. Establishing the first 3 camps on the mountain, ferrying up loads to stock them with supplies, had taken a long time, almost 6 weeks, and we still hadn't reached the foot of the first pinnacle. There was now a real sense of urgency. It looked as if all our efforts would be in vain.
Our real problem is not so much the official end of the expedition, because we can extend that. It's the arrival of the monsoon. And that would effectively stop us dead. It drops a lot of soft, wet snow. You know, at the moment we're just under 8,000 metres. 7,850 metres is our high point.
But we are having problems.
Well, there's an immense amount of wind at that altitude. It's not an average year from that point of view as far as we can see. It certainly is hurting people. We're noticing 1 or 2 people just fading out the game now.
People like Tony Brindle.
I can't breathe up there while I'm coughing, and it's making it very hard work. Today I was up at the first buttress, which is about 7,300 metres. A lot of powder snow, a lot still falling. Making trails is very hard work because it's constantly sliding away from under your feet, and there's no ropes up there. We went up a few days ago to try and do what we were doing today, and we just had to come back down because you can't move. We were being knocked over on the flat.
Our hopes were repeatedly dashed as violent storms swept across the mountain, forcing us to make a difficult retreat down to advanced base camp.
There was a raging blizzard, and it was obvious that we should get off the mountain that day. We left Snowhole about 10 o'clock, and we're moving through very deep, unstable snow, triggering a lot of very small avalanches. It was pretty nerve-wracking until we got onto the fixed ropes, which gave us some security. It was one of the hardest days I've ever had on the hill, just to get off.
The blizzards didn't even spare base camp. Winds of up to 100 miles an hour tore through the fabric of the tents, and the temperature was 30 degrees below. It made the effort of walking all the way back down seem hardly worthwhile.
When the guys came down 3 days ago, they were sliding down ropes chest deep in snow, huge avalanches. I mean, we've just been killed by the weather. It's quite something.
The expedition had reached the most difficult point on the mountain just as the weather was at its worst. On reaching the foot of the pinnacles, just below 8,000 meters, a violent storm forced them to retreat. and Mal decided to abandon the climb.
You know, at some stage you've got to decide to give up. We're getting very close to being dangerous. As it is, we've got everybody off alive, nobody with frostbite. And that on Everest is a fair achievement anyway.
It was the 21st of May, and as they dismantled the tents at Advanced Base Camp, the climbers were filled with mixed emotions. They were longing to go back to their families and the comforts of home. But the decision to give up was not a totally unanimous one. Some mountaineers had been out of radio contact at base camp. There was also the terrible irony that since Mal had called off the expedition, the weather had been fine and clear, the best days we'd had since we arrived. The mountain looked tempting, and whilst the others returned to base camp to rest before the long journey home, Kurt and I decided to stay up with John Tinker and Rick Allen.
I'd like to go back up and see what conditions are like up at Camp 3 and Camp 4. We've got about 5 days until the yaks are due, and I'd sooner be up there than drinking coffee at base camp. So we just feel like having a look at the conditions. Maybe even get back up to our high point with a bit of luck. As I set off alone, I wished that either Sandy or Alan Fife, who were still fairly strong, could have joined me on the last attempt, but they were out of radio contact at base camp. As I moved up the slope, the snow conditions were not as bad as I feared they might be, and I was able to make fairly good progress.
Well, you'll know tomorrow night where I am, and you can make your plans accordingly. Over.
Yeah, I don't think any problems move very fast up either the North Ridge or our routes. I can get in a position in a day and a half, I think.
Okay, well, let's hope for some good weather. If you've got a barometer down there, keep an eye on it tomorrow. I've got one here as well. So obviously, if I'm moving during the day, I can't register any changes.
Okay, we'll listen in on the arrow throughout tomorrow then. Out to you.
Over and out.
I was thinking back to the expedition 3 years previously, which had failed, and about the disappearance of Pete and Joe higher on the pinnacles.
I'm in Camp 4, pretty comfortable. Over.
Okay, what's your plans for tomorrow then, over?
Well, if the weather's as good as today, and I'm feeling really good, I'll try and go with my gear to the top of the first pinnacle. If it's a bit doubtful, I'm a bit shagged, I'll take a day sack, and I'll get as high as I can. I'll come back here tomorrow night and descend to ABC the following day. Over.
On my 4th day, alone on the mountain, I was climbing on the first pinnacle and reached the point at which Pete and Joe had left a camera behind and a tangle of fixed ropes. It was almost encouraging, providing a bond with that previous attempt. Ground was getting increasingly difficult for solo climbing. I decided that had to be my high point. Very reluctantly, I turned back down the pinnacle.
It was the 28th of May. Rick had reached a new expedition height of 8,150 meters.
Shall I tell you about the situation here, over?
Please, yeah, I saw 2 bodies going up to the North Col. Over.
Yeah, that's Mary and Josemar. They're not too sure how high they're going to go because obviously their morale's a bit damaged. Kurt and Julie are going to go up to the North Col tomorrow as well, so that means there's going to be a pretty good track up there. How high they're going to go, they're not too sure. It depends a lot on the Basques.
When someone's killed, it's always a difficult decision, whether to pack up and go home, or if you can find the courage, and as a tribute to the dead person, to go back on the mountain. They made the brave decision to make another attempt on the summit, But after burying their friend, they were unable to go on.
We had hoped to go in support of the Basques and to make our own attempt to get as high on the mountain as possible. But while I was filming Rick's last try on the ridge, I became snowblind.
It's a tremendous blow when illness or tragedy hits a small, close-knit group. Kurt and I still had to go back up to the North Col to rescue our film equipment, which we left there after the Basque accident. The Basques had gone now down to base camp, and all the members of our own team were back with their families in England. We were alone, totally dependent on each other, and although the weather was good, we could do nothing. We just had to sit and wait until Kurt was sufficiently recovered to go back on the mountain. We waited another day, and although he hadn't fully regained his sight, we felt we had to move.
It was history repeating itself. Last year on K2 we had also stayed on alone, after the main expedition had gone home. And the two of us managed to get to the summit of Broad Peak, an 8,000-meter climb. But 2 against Everest was hardly any match at all. The monsoons were due any day now, and we would need all the luck we could get.
There were many things on our minds as we made our way back up the North Col, possibly to reach and film the other side of the pinnacles, which would help future expeditions. There was our responsibility to our loved ones at home and to each other, to rescue our film equipment and to get down safely. We pitched camp on the North Col at about 23,000 feet, pummeled by the constant noise of the buffeting wind. We'd lived with it every day since we arrived at base camp. There was no escaping it. Our tent was anchored with anything that would stick into the snow. Up here we were so exposed. The wind whipped up a boiling cauldron of clouds, its noise sapping our energies and leaving us feeling exhausted.
The following morning the weather looked better, and although the wind was still strong, we were able to push on upwards. As long as its force was constant, we were able to compensate, managing to stay upright and even making reasonable progress. We reached a height of 24,300 feet. The mountains of Tibet and Nepal spread out below us.
Then the wind began to gust, and so strongly it blew me off my feet. We'd struggled for 1.5 hours in storm-force winds to get the tent up, and after just half an hour the wind was so violent the tent poles ripped through their pockets. Somehow we survived the night, but it was all over. Everest had won. But there's always the future, and I could also share Kurt's memories of when in 1978 he'd stood and filmed on the summit of Everest.